Thank you for joining us on the next segment of SHIPS, which stands for SHIPS History, Influence, and Power series. My name is Amy Bachari, and I'm the Education Director at the Steamship Historical Society. And today we're going to be talking with Cecilia Cassidy about her experience on a student ship. Hi, Cecilia. How are you doing today?
I'm good, fine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Can you start by telling us when you were born and where?
I was born August 20th, 1948 in Brooklyn, New York.
What made you decide to take a student ship?
The price. I had been studying in England for a semester abroad at the Fairleigh Dickinson University campus in Roxton, England, in Roxton-Banbury, England. And I was an English major, a poor English major. And I had waitressed at Macy's in White Plains, New York, to be able to go over to England. And I had a summer job with Aer Lingus, actually, as a ground hostess at Kennedy Airport. I was able to fly over to England for the courses that I was signed up for. But I didn't have a way back. And my classmate from the college, the original college that I went to, we were both at Fairleigh Dickinson University for this semester abroad. And so my college roommate found this ship and the Aurelia. And she made all the arrangements, luckily, because I made all the arrangements for Aer Lingus. And so she took care of the way back. That's how I just happened to end up on the SS Aurelia. It was the last voyage. The Aurelia was put in mothballs upon our return to New York. That's the kind of ship that it was. It was on its last legs.
Can you talk a little bit about what life was like on the ship? Do you remember any details about what the ship was like, maybe the public spaces in the cabin, things like that?
Years later, after this voyage, my cousin actually was involved with the Steamship Society, and he arranged a crossing on the QE2. And the details of the QE2 are much more memorable to me than the details of the Aurelia, 50 years ago, because truly it was kind of like a rowboat compared to the QE2. So the details of the ship was pretty simple. We had cabins, we had meals, which were not, QE2 style. and it was mainly the company of 2,000 students all coming together after having spent either a year or a semester abroad and having all kinds of life-changing experiences. So my memory is not so much of the ship itself, but of the environment that was created by all those students who had eye-opening adventures. I was in England for 6 months, going back and forth to the theater in London, studying whatever plays were at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, going to parties with the actors who were in those plays. It was just this amazing, amazing time. And I think that was probably true of many of the students who were on that ship. They had just emerged from these life-changing experiences. I don't mean to say the ship itself was secondary to the excitement that was felt. There was just excitement in the air. Oh my goodness, we're going back to the States. And the States were in turmoil. This voyage that we took was in June of 1969. And in April of 1969, there had been a huge protest on the campus of Cornell University. And that was just 6 weeks, 6, 7, 8 weeks before we boarded this ship. So everybody was talking about that. We'd had these intellectually eye-opening experiences while we were in England or in other countries in Europe. The talk on the ship was about, wow, what is it going to be like when we get back away from these adventures? Because that was another adventure that was ahead of us. Let's say it was not luxury quarters on the Aurelia. And we didn't care because, at that time, students hitchhiked a lot to get around. Years later, the group that I was with had a marvelous, marvelous time, and we would have many reunions afterward. And so we'd meet students who were also at Fairleigh Dickinson's, Roxton College. And we'd ask them, where they hitchhike to. They said, hitchhike? We don't hitchhike. We have a bus that takes us around. You're like, oh my goodness, you're such spoiled brats. I think it was the end of an era of that students from the United States could just travel in, I'll say, in very primitive ways, but you met more people when you hitchhiked. You had more of a sense of people in the country. So on the Aurelia, we felt like we were hitchhiking across the ocean. Made friends with other students who did not live as protected lives as I did. I lived in the 16th century abbey that was the home of Lord North during the American Revolution. So we lived with all these knights in shining armor and around the staircase. It was exhilarating to compare notes with other students who had been in Europe, in non-English speaking countries. So I can't report on the quality of the food or the furniture. There were primitive bunk beds in our rooms, and we didn't care. It was part of the adventure, and it was the last legs for the Aurelia.
I wonder, you talked about it being kind of a tumultuous time in the US. Did your experience abroad and your time with other students who had spent time abroad sort of shape how you viewed what was happening in the US at that time?
Oh, yes. I mean, and not just in the US. I mean, I had gone to public schools in New York through my whole education. And then I went to a women's Catholic college in Westchester County and was shocked at how protected those girls were. So to be with broader thinking people really changed my attitude about, well, I don't know that I had a bad attitude. I wanted to widen my horizons because it was quite confining to be at a women's Catholic college in 1969. I always said travel broadens, and that's the purpose of exploring the world. Even though I went to an English-speaking world because it was easier, it's easier to navigate. So yes, it changed me and everybody in my class. I think to be exposed to other cultures and to the beauty of the language, that the study of Shakespeare brought to us. Yeah, it changed my life and everybody in my class. And we would have reunions, not with people on the ship, but like people on the ship who had just been through a life-changing experience. And my daughter was born a few years after I returned. I immediately brought her on a 3-month car trip cross country. And that shaped her.
Were there any sort of memorable experiences from the ship that you can think of during the voyage?
Well, it was 1969. And I did come from a Catholic background. So there were some wild guys on the ship. And there was a little bit of drugs on the ship that I was vaguely aware of, not participating. That was one thing that, I didn't want to participate in. But I had some friends on the ship who had experiences with their roommates that they were just assigned to a cabin with people that had questionable habits. So this leads to the experience of my father. My father worked for the United States Customs Service, and he was assigned to Kennedy Airport. That's how I came to work for Irish Airlines, because he found me, he found all of his children jobs that he could keep his eye on them, at the International Arrivals Building. That was a wonderful experience too, to work for Irish Airlines, which is how I happened to fly over with them. But the Port Authority has authority over the airport, the international airport, and the international arrivals of the sailing ships. So unbeknownst to me, he got himself assigned to process the passports of the students on the Aurelia. And I didn't know this. It's such a wonderful experience to sail into New York Harbor amongst the skyscrapers. So I was hanging over the railing with some friends I knew, and some of their questionable roommates that, they were not necessarily their friends, but, by virtue of who they were assigned to bunk with. I have always been able to identify, because my eyesight is not great, I've always been able to identify people by their stance, and how everybody's stance and how they walk is like a signature. So I'm leaning over the railing, looking at the tugboat from the Coast Guard that is approaching the ship. I'm looking. I said, "Oh my God, that's my father." So these guys of questionable activity said to me, "That's your father?" And they split like, rats on a ship. They just disappeared. So my father climbs up on the rope ladder, and I say, "Daddy, oh my goodness, this is such a surprise." And those guys were out of sight. They did not want someone who's going to be inspecting their passports or their bags or whatever. So it was very funny. And it was so wonderful to see my father, come at that moment. So then when he was finished with his duties, we left the ship together. And he told me some family news. A very close uncle had just passed away in the previous 2 weeks. And I was on the ship, and he couldn't contact me. And so it just struck me about, what it means to be so far away from family, when there's a family event. The ocean seemed very big, and there's sort of this joke on board the Aurelia that there was a mail ship that would deliver mail to us while we were mid-ocean. So day by day, people were waiting for this mail ship to show up. And of course it never did. So there was no way that I would have gotten that news anyway. So that was a joyful moment, to have my father go to that effort. I can't imagine what it's like to get a reassignment from the airport to the harbor. It couldn't have been easy. So I'm sure he had to pull a lot of strings to make that happen. But it was a moment of joy aboard the Aurelia for my homecoming.
I got a little teary-eyed, honestly. Was there any seasickness, or did you encounter any bad weather? Was anybody around you feeling seasick?
Not that I recall. On the QE2 there was, because we traveled the route of this was the Centennial Crossing. So we traveled the route of the Titanic in December. There were rough waters. They even had to change course. And so my cousin, he had said that there's something that you can chew. I didn't get seasick. And I didn't get seasick on the Aurelia because it was that sail was in June. The weather was pretty good. There weren't any storms or anything. Whereas on the QE2, they closed the doors to the outside deck because it was too dangerous. It's like, oh dear. And no such thing happened on the Aurelia.
Did you have any last thoughts or any other memories from the ship or that time you wanted to share?
Well, just generally, I mean, encourage students to travel. You know, ship travel is an adventure in itself. You know, for some people, it might be the quality of the food. Let me assure you that was not the case on the student ship. So, but it's just to cross an ocean is an awesome experience. It's just awesome. It gives you an appreciation for the size of the earth, for the composition of the earth. And especially, you know, this is 52 years after, you know, that first crossing. And now, you know, our oceans and our environment have to be paid attention to. And it's just awe-inspiring about how big the ocean is. And to travel across it, no matter how mild the weather, it's just awesome and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Just standing alone as an experience, as opposed to, you know, just being a journey between two very different environments. It's well worthwhile. And to spend time on the railings, as opposed to all the entertainment that's available, you know, on the ships. The ocean itself is just awe-inspiring. It just has no words.
You actually reminded me when you were talking about that I forgot to ask one other question, which was, do you recall, were there activities planned on board or games or things for the students to do while you were at sea?
Well, there were a lot of educational activities. So more lectures than games. Or maybe I was just a dullard that, you know, there were no volleyball courts or anything like that. So I remember signing up for a German course because there are a lot of German-speaking people on the ship. That was the main thing that I remembered, you know, taking a German course. But there were lots of discussion groups about politics and geography and history that were, you know, educational, and about easing back into American culture after having had such an experience as we had, and coming to the United States 2 weeks after the riots at Cornell. Oh my goodness. It was a little scary. Because, you know, certainly in England, you know, our experience was just idyllic. You know, it's just idyllic. Tea served at 4 o'clock every afternoon. And the Beatles had just cut their album at Abbey Road. And so there was a little television this big, and we'd all crowd into the room to watch Paul and crew sang Get Back like every week. And they didn't have that on the Aurelia, I'm sorry to say, you know. I'm not sorry to say, because, you know, it's like roughing it on the ocean.
Yeah, that's an experience in and of itself. I think all college students go through that in some way or another.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great experience on board the ship. I mean, it was a great way to end a grand adventure. We really appreciated it. And then, you know, my father's greeting was the icing on the cake.
Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you.